Despite years of expedition, study, and intrigue, our North and South Poles are still some of the most underexplored and fascinating places on planet Earth. Especially so because these seemingly inhospitable lands are host to a wide array of wildlife that somehow manages to survive harsh terrain, sub-zero temperatures, and unrelenting icy winds. But even the Arctic's apex predators struggle to survive in Yu-Gi-Oh's metagame, with Glacial Beasts being a prime example. Because no matter how their camouflage may work in the real world, they find it hard to blend in a series of competent cards. And that's why they're the subject of today's video, where we'll be exploring what makes Glacial Beasts so brittle, the shallow iceberg of ideas behind the strategy, and what they'd need to potentially break the ice of competitive play. Glacial Beasts are an extremely limited series of water aqua monsters that were used by Olga, a side character from Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, who was, fittingly, an exchange student from the Liu Institute of Duelist Arctic campus that represented their Synchro summoning course in the Arc League Championships. These cards have a heavy emphasis on using the battle phase to their advantage, but your main goal is to attempt to use Blizzard Wolf and Polar Penguin, your only two main deck monsters, to synchro off into the deck's boss monster, Glacial Beasts Iceberg Narwhal, a payoff with a surprisingly okay effect that could theoretically leave an opponent frozen in fear if you manage to catch them off guard. As a result, the concept behind Glacial Beasts is pretty simple. By using the battle phase oriented effects of your main deck monsters, you can prevent an opponent's lethal push either with using Polar Penguins on destruction removal or with Blizzard Wolf's attack negation. And if you have both available to you, you'll want to bring out Blizzard Wolf first in most situations, but the way you use it can depend on whether you're going first or second. If you're going first, Blizzard Wolf can set a figurative trap for your opponent, as if you get on the field or even in the graveyard, then, when your opponent's battle phase swings by you, you can use its graveyard effect to bring it out, and its on-field effect to prevent an opponent threatening your life points by negating an attack. But that's not all, because when you negate the attack, you'll have the opportunity to bring out Polar Penguin from your hand, which not only nets you an extra body, but allows you to use its on-summon removal effect to deal with your opponent's boss monsters from the field. This then leaves you with a level 3 tuner and a level 4 non-tuner on your side of the field, which you could use for any synchro summon of a level 7. But if you're trying to stay true to the series, then you'll bring out Glacial Beast Iceberg Narwhal to control the game with its high attack stat and powerful battle phase negate, which you can use to deal with any stray battle tricks or difficult to deal with effects, supposing you have another monster to bring to the field to keep this effect online. Meanwhile, if you have the same setup when going second, you can actually bring out the deck's boss monster even more quickly, as by using Blizzard Wolf to negate your own attack during your battle phase, you'll still unlock the ability to bring out Polar Penguin from your hand and start chewing through your opponent's board, so that by the time you get to main phase 2, have a wide array of powerful level 7 synchros that you can use to clear away even more of the field, or as a way to extend even further. Especially so because, even though these monsters clearly have an affinity for ice, they're widely splashable. None of them have any kind of lock that would prevent you from bringing out a generic boss monster to build your board. And while the likes of Blizzard Wolf and Iceberg Narwhal's effects only really work if you have other water monsters available, that still leaves a wide array of unique strategies that could theoretically call upon any of the Glacial Beasts to suit their specific needs. But unfortunately for this series, these benefits melt away at the slightest scrutiny. If you're trying to build and play the deck specifically to center around these cold critters, then the biggest limiting factor is, of course, how few cards the strategy has available to it. Its synergy with generic water monsters makes it so the series can technically function as a standalone strategy, but it's one that heavily is reliant on generic options to function at all. Doubly so because both of the main deck monsters require 2-card combos to function. So trying to force the deck to work with just Glacial Beasts will make even the most mediocre of plays awfully inconsistent. And while the option of playing some generic archetypal tools or a secondary engine to boost the deck is absolutely appealing, if you're willing to use these options instead, it makes you wonder why you're waiting until turn 3 to make a level 7 synchro with Blizzard Wolf, when you could instead be using any other water starter or extender to make one on the first turn. Or why would you summon out Polar Penguin when bringing out a go-tier Crystron with Blizzard Wolf can net you way more advantage in the long run? Or why would you even consider running Iceberg Narwhal to negate one effect of the battle phase when other level 7 synchros can clear the field or do the same job but better? Now, with that being said, Glacial Beasts still lend themselves to generic use. And surprisingly, a couple of niche strategies have found themselves willing to try and take advantage of this strange series. These decks definitely don't center around the Glacial Beast concept or strategy, so it's not really fair to call them tried and true Glacial Beast decks. But it's important to recognize that for as narrow as this archetype appears, there are a couple of interesting ideas frozen within the ice that we just need to thaw out. Let's start off by exploring the boss monster the deck centers around, Glacial Beasts Iceberg Narwhal. This titanic monster is a level 7 Synchro that can be summoned with any tuner, but specifically requires a water non-tuner. And for jumping through that extra hoop, you get a somewhat impressive 2700 attack beat stick that, so long as you control another monster, can negate a card or effect that's activated during the battle phase and then destroy that card. And if you ever get the opportunity to actually use this effect, then by all means, it can definitely have an impact. There's a reason why the current TCG ban list is filled with the likes of Appaloosa, Borreload Savage Dragon, and Baron de Fleur. Negates and Yu-Gi-Oh are incredibly powerful, as they can prevent your opponent's best effects from going off, making it so a single well-timed negate has the potential to shut down an opponent's entire setup. And in the case of Narwhal, if you can make it to the battle phase, it's essentially a legal copy of Baron, becoming an omni-negate that can not only deal with an opponent's counterplay, but will also destroy whatever it negates, essentially acting as a removal tool to boot, which sounds amazing, but only on paper. Because for this effect to be ban-worthy as Baron, you would actually need to reach a battle phase after making Narwhal, and stick another monster on the field at the same time. This doesn't sound like too difficult of a demand at first, but there's two big factors that ice cap this effect from being as cool as it could be. The first is that in the modern era, interactions and utility tools that remove monsters from the field are a mandatory part of the modern game, and are found in almost every single competent strategy, with them being comically easy to take advantage of on either player's turn, which is a great thing for the general health of the game, as it promotes some very interesting gameplay. But in the case of Iceberg Narwhal, it's extremely unfortunate, as if your opponent genuinely has a strong battle phase effect that's pivotal for their success, then all they need to do is deal with Iceberg Narwhal, or your second monster on field, well before you can even think about switching phases. And this leads into its second big issue of the effect being battle phase only. Summoning out Iceberg Narwhal without any other kind of interaction leaves you effectively defenseless, because most strategies are far more concerned with resolving their main phase-oriented effects rather than ones that need to use it in battle. Now, don't get it twisted, if you happen to run into a stray Tenpai player, then you could end up getting some great use out of this effect, since these decks really like it when their battle phase goes uninterrupted. But because most decks combo off in the main phase, even if you're a duelist that's well researched and knows the perfect places to interrupt and interact, you won't have an opportunity to show off that knowledge where it counts, which allows your opponent to build up their field and deal with your threats without needing to worry about the Iceberg Narwhal on your side of the field, as it's essentially a vanilla beat stick to them. So that brings us to the question, what's the point in trying to make Iceberg Narwhal in the first place? Going first, it's not doing anything to prevent your opponent's plays, and is essentially just a sitting duck. So if you have the opportunity to make a Synchro 7, you'd be better served by something like an Ancient Fairy Dragon, that can at least act as an extender, or FA Dawn Dragster if you'd like to actually interact with your opponent during their turn. And when you're going second, you have the likes of Black Rose Dragon to deal with the entire field at once, a Kula Belt if you need to deal with a specific card, and even if you're worried about battle phase effects specifically, you can bring out Odd Eyes Meteor Burst Dragon, which, while limited to just stopping monsters, can prevent any monster effect from being used in battle, or if battle tricks are concerned, then once again, Dawn Dragster is going to give you a far greater array of utility. The only way in which you can really justify Iceberg Narwhal's inclusion in your extra deck is if your deck locks you into water monsters in some way. But even when compared to other level 7 water synchros, you have Gungur as an excellent way to chew through your opponent's field or interaction, while the likes of Deep Sea Prima Donna and White Aurora Monoceros can be excellent for extension in the right deck, making them far more applicable to summon on turn 1. So, as it stands, using Iceberg Narwhal for its negate is a flimsy goal at best, especially if you're attempting to summon it with your Glacial Beast monsters, which is already a Sisyphean task in of itself. But there is one aspect of Iceberg Narwhal that we actually haven't touched upon yet that can, theoretically, turn it into a powerhouse of a boss monster that can make your opponent surrender the moment you summon it. You see, as well as being a battle phase negate, Narwhal also comes with a bonus effect that makes it that your opponent destroys another monster you control with an attack or card effect, you get to burn them for 600 damage. This seems pretty inconspicuous at first, as it appears like it's just a minor disincentive to prevent your opponent from dealing with your other monsters, with a small amount of burn damage. But notably, this particular effect isn't a hard once per turn. Now, it's extremely unlikely that an opponent is going to accidentally and repeatedly keep destroying your other monsters until they burn all 8,000 of the life points. However, if you can set up some kind of infinite loop in which your opponent is forced to destroy your monster that you keep bringing to the field, summoning Iceberg Narwhal goes from a strange misplay to a game-winning option that can FTK an opponent outright. Although getting to that point requires a ton of hoops to jump through, as not only do you need a way to set up the loop itself, but also a way to guarantee that you'll be able to bring out Iceberg Narwhal, which is quite a bit of investment, and it makes it so this particular strategy isn't really viable at the competitive level. But technically speaking, if you're willing to base your entire deck around using the card to FTK, Iceberg Narwhal could end up winning you duels, which gives the card some weirdly scary potential as an option that might genuinely be useful in the future depending on what kind of water support is released. However, it's unlikely that the potential would shine because of the other Glacial Beasts, as neither of the two main deck monsters makes summoning this Synchro particularly easy. Take Blizzard Wolf for example. As it stands, it's the only starter in the series, and calling it a starter is extremely generous. You see, with Blizzard Wolf's first effect, you can negate an attack while it's on the field, and then you get the opportunity to bring out a level 4 or lower water monster from your hand other than another copy of itself. This is an extremely peculiar way of making Wolf a way to start your plays, as it requires a battle phase, an attack to negate, and for you to have drawn another water monster for it to actually start your plays. This isn't impossible by any means, but it's a lot of conditions you need to go out of your way for this effect to do anything, especially if you want to use this effect proactively to combo on your own turn, as you have to give up your own battle phase and negate your own attack, virtually telling your opponent that they're going to survive until the next turn to stage a comeback no matter what you do. Now, being able to bring out a level 4 or lower water monster is at least a great bonus, but there are other better ways of extending in water decks. So if you're surrendering your battle phase to bring out a monster from your hand, it better be a doozy. Although, in all fairness to this effect, instead of forcing it through to act as a going second starter, if you can commit Blizzard Wolf to your field when its attack negation can technically be useful to protect your board from battle, which, while not that useful on its own, can be pretty okay if you have a board to protect. After all, there are a ton of great water monsters that are easily accessible and game-winningly strong, but have relatively low attack. So if you could use Blizzard Wolf to protect that monster, and then summon out a Polar Penguin to remove another threat from the field, that sounds like a game-winning play. But setting this up alongside an interactive board isn't an easy task, especially because the only way Blizzard Wolf can freely bring itself out is with a normal summon, or with its second effect, which can only be activated at the start of your opponent's battle phase while it's in the graveyard to bring yourself out to the field in attack position, with a downside that makes it so that you have to banish it when it leaves the field. However, to be able to activate this effect at all, you need to control no monsters, making it so that you won't have a board to protect in the first place. So if you're jumping through those extra hoops, you better be rewarded by summoning an extra piece of interaction, another floodgate, or just a better card to protect from battle that doesn't require another card in hand. The only real way in which Blizzard Wolf can be uniquely useful is if you happen to have been able to drag a duel to the point where both you and your opponent are running on fumes and are working with so few resources that its graveyard effect could genuinely come up when your opponent tries to get in some damage. But if you're playing Blizzard Wolf, getting to that point is going to be difficult. Although, interestingly enough, the same can't really be said for Glacial Beast Polar Penguin, the only tuner in the series. Penguin has two effects, one which occurs whenever it's special summoned and allows you to target and return a monster opponent controls to the hand, while its second effect occurs when it's destroyed by a battle or card effect and allows you to target any card your opponent controls and return it to the hand, but you only use one of these effects per turn. So for what it's worth, it has some pretty great removal on both effects. The second one is a little bit more niche since you either have to hope that it's destroyed by battle, hope that it's popped by an opponent's card effect, or pop it yourself, but if either manages to resolve, you have a solid way to chew through your opponent's field. And for the most part, both parts of these effects are easy to use and intuitive, as it's pretty clear how you're supposed to use Polar Penguin in combination with Blizzard Wolf's effect, which allows this powerful removal effect to actually work as interaction during your opponent's turn, albeit only during the battle phase. But if Polar Penguin's best plays were limited by how well it paired with Blizzard Wolf, it'd be in a pretty rough spot. However, not only is this effect generic enough to be used by almost any other strategy, eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed something very interesting about Polar Penguin's name. It's also a penguin monster, And not only is it a penguin monster, it's one that's actually integral for penguin strategies to function as well as they do. You see, one of your main goals to keep in mind when playing a penguin deck is summoning out Penguin Brave, an incredible archetypal tool that allows you to summon out any penguin from your deck in face-down defense position, and then flip it up whenever your opponent activates a monster effect, allowing for the likes of Penguin Soldier to be a truly scary piece of interaction even in the modern era. One of the easiest ways of making Penguin Brave is by bringing out Great Emperor Penguin to the field, usually with Royal Penguin's Garden, and using its effect to summon 2 penguins from your deck. And if you're trying to summon Brave, you'll have 2 options for tuners, which will then influence your choice of non-tuner. Now, you could absolutely summon out the level 5 Penguin Squire as your tuner of choice, and the level 1 Puny Penguin as your non-tuner, but you actually get way more value if the non-tuner you summon is no penguin. Because if you use no penguin for the Synchro summon of Brave, then when you use Brave's effect, no penguin will bring itself out from the grave as a free body that can be used for extension, or kept around so that your Penguin Soldier's effect will end up banishing your opponent's cards instead, which is a really fun way to modernize Penguin Soldier's removal. But for no penguin to shine with this, you need a level 3 tuner. So Penguin Squire doesn't work here, which is where Glacial Beast Polar Penguin comes in, as it's a tuner that just so happens to be the perfect level to summon alongside the level 3 no penguin to reach the level 6 Penguin Brave. Not only that, but because Polar Penguin's effect can be used whenever it's special summoned, it's still triggered when being summoned by Great Emperor Penguin's effect, allowing you to use it to deal with your opponent's options on your way to get into your boss monster. But the coolest part of all of this is that this effect also synergizes with no penguin. So if you get the chance to deal with your opponent's monsters with this effect, it'll actually end up being banished instead. But of course, Polar Penguin's removal is more of a solid bonus than anything else. The best part about the card, and the thing that's made it so important for penguins, is that it's just a solid enough level 3 tuner that, incidentally, can end up helping the deck generate a chunk of free advantage just by having the perfect name and level, which incidentally has allowed for the card to shine. And make no mistake, penguins aren't the most competitive strategy out there. But to be an important part of a decent enough rogue strategy makes Polar Penguin a superbly successful piece of support, just not for the Glacial Beast series specifically. So now that we've analyzed these Flash Foes and Friends, is it fair to really call them a failed set of cards? Well, yes, although there's strangely some nuance to this answer. If we were to judge Glacial Beast's ability to form a competent strategy by itself, then it's without a doubt a failed series. The deck is entirely battle phase oriented and limited to a single line of play, which is hoping that your opponent attacks you, or you have to be willing to waste your battle phase, which is abysmal for cards that were released in 2020. But to judge them on that merit alone would be entirely unfair, as these cards were clearly made to be generically useful. And technically speaking, 2 out of the 3 cards we've discussed could end up finding their way into a non-Glacial Beast strategy. Iceberg Narwhal, for as limited as it is, does have its niches, and Polar Penguin's existence actively changes how Penguin is played. This is where the answer to that question gets a little bit more murky, as you could say that there are clear examples of success. But at the same time, the number of decks that they're actually useful for is really limited. So it's still very fair to say that the series has ultimately failed to be either an independent deck or generically usable. So if more Glacial Beast cards are released in the future, I would hope that they would follow the trend of being useful support for other decks, because trying to think about how these cards could function as a theoretically independent strategy is difficult to think about given how little we have to work with. Doubly so because the anime also doesn't have a strong idea of how this deck is supposed to play. Olga mostly dueled off screen, and whenever we did get to see her in action, she was relying on the same 3 Glacial Beasts, and lost every single duel that she participated in. Although, with that being said, there are a couple of cool ideas that the deck presents that could be pushed even further. The most interesting of which is actually its biggest flaw. Its over-reliance on the battle phase definitely sucks for anyone trying to use these cards. But we've seen how battle phase focused archetypes can still be competitively viable in the modern era with the likes of Tempai and Gladiator Beasts. And if the right cards were released to emphasize Glacial Beasts' battle phase uses, then that could allow for Iceberg Narwhal to be a genuine threat. You could even make Blizzard Wolf a strong card if you had a greater incentive to play during your opponent's turn in a similar fashion to Godi or Crystron. However, as it stands right now, Glacial Beasts as a series is disjointed and doesn't function by itself. And while it is cool to see that they are seeing some use in decks, if you're holding to the idea of them being successful, you might just need to let it go. And that's the video. If you can think of any other ways to fix the deck, or know of any other cards or mechanics that have failed, please let us know down in the comments below.